Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and welcome to Conscious 2. My guest in the studio today is Mark Walsh. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
And Mark is a teacher in the field of embodiment training. And we've done a previous interview around that work. But in today's interview, we're going to explore some of the issues, for want of a better word, with Western spirituality. And I should say that I'm particularly interested to have this dialogue with Mark. I followed Mark on Facebook for a number of months, and often when Mark posts something, I find myself thinking, I totally agree with that, but I never would have posted it myself. That's kind of my general kind of response to your musings. And I think, Mark, there's a lot that you say in this area that I think is very true. And I think, as I say, it's often the things other people probably think but wouldn't call out. Maybe as a starting point, what is the issue? What's your issue, let's say? What's your issue?
Really
We've only got 25 minutes of the interview.
She was a nun, that's a true story.
But when you look at Western spirituality, what winds you up about it?
Great. Well, I've talked to my lawyer ahead of this interview. Okay. I've looked at incitement and libel laws, and ignored her completely, so we're going to have a lot of fun.
Great. Well, you've also explained to me I'm also liable for anything you say, which
Apparently. She just hangs out. She face palms a lot, my lawyer, with my accountant. They just get together and cry. Okay, so I've been interested in kind of personal growth field for about 20 years, been working full-time professionally the last 7 years, running a company. I think my perspective is very pragmatic I come from the martial arts. Martial arts is very pragmatic. If someone's punching you in the head, your theories don't count for a lot. You need to get out of the way. Same in business. Business, I work in kind of, fast, hard-paced business. And again, there's only so much you can get away with in terms of dolphins and chakras and things like that with that crowd.
Yeah.
Though if you put it in the right language, and language is a key thing here, I would say. Mm-hmm. I've taught some of the top police in England to meditate. I've worked with aid workers in Afghanistan, with the military in Sierra Leone, in the House of Lords. Very lax security, by the way, if you're watching this. Just put that out there. That's all I'm putting out there. So, so it's possible to work with these groups if you put things in the right language and connect to what they care about. So for me, spirituality is very rich, and there's lots of good stuff that can be done with all groups of people. But I value the pragmatic approach, and certainly the work in war zones, in business, in martial arts really emphasizes that. So I get irritated, frankly, when I see just really bad teaching or superstition or some of the spiritual wankeritis.
The technical term?
Yes, the technical. I did a video called "Are You a Spiritual Wanker?" I just did it for a laugh after I did some business videos one time. I put it on the internet, and it was phenomenally successful. It's got thousands of hits, and all around the world, I was getting, people were posting this, and I was getting hate mail. But simultaneously, I was getting people saying, "Thank God for saying this," because it's so fucking obvious. Whenever you go to I'm a Buddhist. You go to a Buddhist festival or a retreat or any of these things. That just a lot of it is just about being a wanker. It's not actually about being wiser or kinder or any of those sort of things. A wanker's a jerk, by the way, if you're in America. It's a jerk. I've gone to America next, I'm coming to you next. And so it became apparent some of these trends that weren't helpful, shall we say.
Yeah. Well, one of the things actually you posted last week, and I'm going to slightly butcher the paraphrasing, but you basically said that, in the Western world, it's very easy for us to think, if you just change your thinking, you can change your whole reality. And basically, the point that I think you're making is that it's like somebody who's literally starving in a war zone.
Sure.
The idea that you can just change your thinking and your life is just
magic wand.
Just not how it works.
Yeah. So, so here's where it ties into the political. So as well as the video on being spiritual wanker was kind of lighthearted, but then a year or two later, I'd done stuff at Occupy, I'd been around various kind of demonstrations, and I really started to see the political implications of kind of particularly more New Agey kind of spirituality in the West. There's a Marxist theorist called Zizek, and he said that Buddhism was the perfect religion for the modern consumerist capitalist world. And it shocked me a little bit as a Buddhist, and I started thinking about it. And he misunderstood Buddhism a little bit, but certainly sort of New Age interpretations of Buddhism and any other spiritual practice are particularly helpful for a consumer society for several reasons. So one would be that if we say everything is to do with the individual, this is essentially a right-wing point of view, that causation is individually driven. So why are you poor? Because you didn't work hard enough. Or the New Age version, why are you poor? Because you didn't think smartly enough. Yeah. So that if you read Smile or Die, for example, this is all about how positive thinking is a kind of tyranny.
Yes.
And just looking at the psychological completely ignores the structural factors. We're not playing on a level playing field. Yes, psychology is massively important. It's not that it doesn't matter. Our thinking is important, of course. But when I see the people in this field, I see they're really contributing to a lot of suffering. There's a kind of blaming in that. And also just by saying, this is what you need to change. So actually, if you look at the history, it's fascinating. In the 60s, people were kind of burning things and demonstrating against Vietnam War and getting upset with the systems that were there. And that got kind of circumvented into personal growth. So the reason that we have the industry that we both work in was actually, it was like the second matrix. It was like you got to, instead of being unhappy with your life and then therefore saying, there's a lot of inequality and maybe something in London needs changing or whatever it is, we say, well, it's me personally. So by reducing it to the individual, it also comes from the American cultural perspective, which dominate our industry completely. So I've lived in America, got a lot of American friends. That's what racists say, isn't it?
I got lots of black friends.
Yeah, lots of black friends. No, so lived in America, American girlfriends, blah, 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 American colleagues. And if we look at the culture, it's dominating our industry. Yes. I call it the spiritual industrial complex. Yeah. And
another technical term.
And the analogy I would use is, any culture dominating a kind of personal growth industry, if Sweden was dominating this personal growth industry, would also be problematic.
But everyone would be a lot more beautiful.
They are blonde and beautiful. That's true. It's the Ukraine is even better. So yeah. Anyway, there's an aside. My Ukrainian girlfriend, if you're watching this, hello, sweetie. My other Ukrainian lover, hello, sweetie. So yeah. So where was I? Culture.
Yeah.
So hyper-individualistic.
Right.
So America, a very hyper-individualistic culture. To the point where if you start talking about culture, they'll say you're racist. It depends. It depends on the individual. And I'll say that's my point. What you just did there. So there is such a thing as culture. And as Europeans, we see this because we live next door to some quite different cultures, and if you go to France or Germany, you see the differences. So the field of personal growth is dominated by a right-wing perspective, and B, a certain cultural perspective which supports that. And it can mean that personal development simply becomes a way of like Prozac.
Right, it becomes a band-aid or a plaster on the problem.
Yeah, so we live in a socially unjust, environmentally destructive and emotionally abusive world, driven by forces which don't have our interests at heart and are crazy-making. I work in war zones and I work with trauma, but actually the standard situation in the Western world is traumatic in a kind of slightly milder sense. We all live in a world that encourages dissociation from emotions and spirituality in the body, which is my particular area. And that's massively problematic. And if we then just go to yoga to deal with that, we're not getting to the root of the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think what can happen is people can use their practices as a way to make themselves feel better without really dealing with the core of the issue. And I know you studied some of Ken Wilber's work, and he talks about translational change and transformational change. Sure. I don't know if you've heard that particular language, but I think one of the things that strikes me from quite a lot of what you post is that it's like there are real issues in this world which are genuinely serious issues that you would think the people which are supposedly more conscious would have even more awareness and more engagement in those issues.
But they don't. So, for example, one of my teachers, Rob Mayer at Gaia House, Buddhist teacher, one of the few Buddhist teachers talking out about environmental issues, climate change. He refuses to fly around the world like most big shot Buddhist teachers do because of that, for example. So really putting his money where his mouth is. And, he said that his talks are very unpopular when he talks about the environment. They had a retreat which was all about social change and justice, very unpopular. There's a network in America that's almost closed down because so few people are going to it, which is strange when more and more people are going to spirituality. And if I just put on Facebook, how many of my friends do yoga or meditate or do martial arts, then it'll be lots and lots. But how many have volunteered this week or are involved in some kind of peace activism or environmental activism? And it's very few. It's very few. I remember when I was part of Occupy, I was sort of like, well, where am my profession? And the nice thing is there's a bit more of an integration starting to happen. So when you go to protests and things now, there's a bit more awareness of the psychological side. And we have people at Occupy reowning their inner banker doing voice dialogue, and they've seen Genpo and people like that.
Yeah.
So there's starting to happen, because they used to be quite separate, there's starting to happen an integration. But in the spiritual world, most people are doing spirituality instead of any kind of change out in the world, not in addition to.
Right.
So which I think is perhaps a critical piece. And usually the arguments given is something like, well, I'm being the change. Well, no, Gandhi also just fucked shit up. Gandhi just totally undermined the economy of the British Empire.
Right.
He didn't just be the change. He didn't just meditate, right? He did some serious shit.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things that kind of, I get it and it puzzles me is often, you know, I'll say to someone, you see this event, this world event that's happening. Oh, I don't watch the news. So well, why don't you watch the news? Oh, it's just all negative. Yeah. And I'm like, but these are things that are happening in our world, which are potentially awful things happening to fellow human beings, and you just don't want to know about it? For me, I find that shocking. Yeah, I mean, there's some wisdom in sort of guarding kind of what media comes in and what you expose yourself to. But if it comes to the point of just hiding oneself away, it's certainly not in keeping with my values. And you know, this is very sort of middle class spirituality that's developed is really all about just feeling good. You know, it's another kind of Prozac. You know, I asked the question: if yoga made you fat, would you still do yoga? and a lot of people were like, "Oh, yes, of course I would," but clearly lying. Yeah. So, why? You know, because these things are now just in service of. You know, this was spiritual materialism was named years ago, but I don't think the guy that named it would have had any idea the degrees it would have got to in London, you know, New York, the modern world. I mean, I noticed this in myself as well. Like, you know, am I doing embodiment or meditation just to feel better, just to feel superior to other people, or somehow to, you know, to reinforce some old kind of patterns that I've had? I mean, that's always been a problem for practitioners, but I think now it's almost actively encouraged, you know, and certainly we see the consumer culture around a lot of the productization, which is, you know, in America, there's lots of TMs and lots of, you know, copyrighted products. The Brits tend to do that a bit less. It's a bit less in our culture. And something really positive about the Americans is, as a culture, they're entrepreneurial and they seem to put things forward. And you know, I certainly wouldn't be running a business if it wasn't for the positive influence of American friends. Right. I think they say, you go, you do what you want to do. Yeah. It is hard, you know, you put babies on spikes, you know, do your thing. But my British friends were kind of cynical, you know. Yeah, that's not going to work. Yeah. But on the other side, the flip side is a sort of making things into a product, putting a barrier and saying this is now a trademark thing. Like, how many people, including me, that come on the show are fucking selling something? You know, I sell courses, you know, other people are selling courses or books or, you know, online series, whatever it is. And that is actually in their message, you know, that's influencing. They don't want to upset certain audiences, you know, they're marketing. And I'm certainly not anti-business. I'm a businessman, I work in business. You know, I can see the benefits of these spiritual practices in business. You know, I've done work with... I won't name them, a major investment company that work in sub-Saharan Africa. And we did some emotional work, some spiritual work, some embodied work. And then I was in a 5-star hotel in Morocco with them. And later in the afternoon, they said, why don't you hang around? Because you know, your flight's not somewhere, hang around and see what we do. To get to know them. I thought, great, get to know the client, great. And after that work in the morning, they were having these great conversations about kind of ethnic diversity and reducing pollution, some gold mines they were running, and equality, and there's some coffee plantations. And I said, wow, these are very human conversations. Do you normally have these conversations? And they said, actually, no. And I was like, okay. So I could see, without taking full credit, I could see there was some influence of accessing the body and emotions and spirituality. Or, you know, if I work with one of the big companies, you know, let's take Unilever, they have an emission, the same amount of emissions as Belgium. Okay. As a company, they have the same emissions as Belgium, the country. And they're much better at sorting things out. So Unilever, for example, can say, we're going to cut our global carbon emissions by 50% within 2 years. And if you don't do that, Alex, you're in charge of that, by the way, Alex, and you're super clever. And if you don't do that, you're fired. Okay? So if you do it, we'll give you £1 million bonus. Wow. So they get shit done. Yeah. I mean, you can really see the positive influence they can have. So there's a real positive, and, you know, business people are human beings, and there's the argument of, you know, it's so complicated, because on the one hand, there's a sick person needs a doctor. That's the one hand, yeah. And the other hand is on the same side, there's also, and they have so much power. Like, business runs the world. If you're not working with business or children, you're wasting your time, as far as I'm concerned. You know, the only influential people I see are, you know, working with children for the future or working with business because they run the show. Anyone else, it doesn't seem like a good use of my time. So you can be massively influential in a positive, powerful way, bringing some of this stuff into business. But what I'm hearing you say is that for some people on a spiritual path, what often happens is they see the corporate world as being, which of course it is in many ways toxic and repressive and whatever else. Yeah. And so they see their path as separating away from that to take the space for them. And of course that's valid for a period of time, taking the space for themselves, to connect to themselves. And then there's kind of this sense of, that's bad, that's wrong, I'm spiritual, doing my little kind of thing in isolation over here. And for me, one of the things with Conscious too is how do you get people to actually come back into the world and actually live what's happening for them.
Yes, there's two different areas here of mapping out. I'll go to this one that you've mentioned first of all. So the splitting off of saying business is bad or technology is bad, that's another one I'll see, I don't do Facebook. I'm like, well, I do because it's the modern world and I want to be influential there.
Right.
Do you not use a mobile phone? Do you not use shoes? This is just technology, right? So there's this splitting off and kind of from making kind of all this technology or business or making just normal life bad. And I think that is A, impossible, and B, undesirable. So there's that trend, and for me it is about integration, working in business as well as wherever. Equally comfortable in a business suit as I am in a Aikido gi. So that is one trap, I think, of the spiritual wanker, if we look at the sort of holier than thou. And also it's very mean, because if you have something of use, why are you not bringing it into the world? This retreatism, climate change is going to affect everybody. Right. Where are you going to retreat to? That isn't going to be affected by the weather. Yeah. So, like it exists in isolation, it doesn't.
But I think part of what happens is I think people, they just tune out that stuff. They tune out the fact that climate change is a massive global issue which is going to have a huge impact on everyone on planet Earth.
Sure.
People just tune it out. They tune out the fact that there's corporate influence wars that are going on. And I wonder what you see that actually supports people to reintegrate with that.
Well, if we look at it, I guess, compassionately, there's a certain pain in looking at that, and there's a differentiation before integration. If we look at the kind of Wilbur model of, I think our generation are very much the integration generation. Actually, I always joke it's not your mama's yoga. It was really, it was. Someone's now taken that up as a catchline in America, and now branded it and marketed it. I was saying it. I think they got it from one of my videos. So it's typical. So. There's differentiation and integration, and we're the integration generation, I would say. And great 1960s, thanks guys, did your work, time to die now. Time to roll over. The bigwig, old guys in charge of spirituality, dominating the field. Your time's up. Yeah. Okay, guys, time to move over. Let's put them in an elder's home. There's this place for elders, but in terms of like running the show, I don't think so anymore. I think what they've had to offer has really been given. I don't think they've done what needs to be done in the world. This is a little bit provocative maybe, it's time for them to move aside that differentiation generation. So the integration part is critical, and I think that's now happening in a much bigger way. I'm actually one step ahead of that. So where I was going before was that there's the positives of working with business, but then there's also now, with this integration, there's also some potential negatives. So we've got the negatives of the differentiation, like not being involved with life, not bringing a spiritual practice into life and speaking in a fucking funny voice and using weird words that make no sense, right? So we've got that as a potential trap.
Hanging out in your sweaty Betty or Lululemon thinking that's what makes you spiritual.
Yeah, so we've got the sort of spiritual wanker trap, but then you've also got your kind of the consumer, how it becomes integrated into consumer society, and also in business. So I mentioned some of the positives before, and this is very, in each client for me, I really weigh it up. Like some of them are easy. It's like Saudi Arabian arms dealer. No, thank you. Not for any money. But if it was like deep level, long-term transformational work, maybe, actually.
I get it.
Yeah, so it's in each case, it's really like...
If you can influence that has a great potential.
Absolutely. Sierra Leonean army, many of them, have committed war crimes, tortured people, this kind of thing. But what they wanted to do was peace work to avoid another civil war. I'm on board. Great. Sponsored by the Catholic Church. Hang on, what's the implication? So there's this constant interplay of like, do I work with it? It's a real practical thing for me.
I get it.
And I think to have the simplistic view of either business bad, is not helpful, but also business yay, which is the new one.
Sure.
So we've gone away from this to this, another kind of model here now. It's teaching snipers mindfulness. Is this ethical? One of my teachers, one of the first to do awareness practices with military special forces, for example. And I'm not I have a family in the military. I'm certainly not anti-military. And I would question some of the wisdom of some of the things that are happening.
Sure.
Do we want to be? So there's two arguments here. One is is this whole system sick? And if I go in and do mindfulness or whatever, embodiment, whatever, am I just helping sustain a sick system?
Yes.
Am I the doctor in the concentration camp?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a doctor, I'm helping people, but I'm working for the Nazis,
Right.
to use a kind of cliched example.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah, so there's that. Am I complicit in this? And some people have this very naive view now that mindfulness is great, let's give it to everyone, because mindfulness just, will automatically make everyone better, somehow nicer. And I would say the historical example is the samurai, who were a fascist dictatorship for hundreds of years, who would chop a peasant's head off for looking at them wrong. And they were highly influenced by Zen. And actually, up till World War II, the Zen priests, nearly all of them, except 3, I think, so hundreds of Zen priests, the vast majority were supporting Japanese imperial expansion, including raping and killing all through China.
Right.
Wow.
Wow.
Read Zen at War. So this is a great historical warning for how meditation practices don't always lead to things that would be in keeping with my values, for certain. Yeah. So there's precedent.
Yeah.
So let's say that mindfulness become established as it is becoming in some of the West Coast tech companies. I was at Wisdom 2.0, which very smugly is putting together spirituality with technology. And there's some good guys there. I know the guys that run it, some good people involved. And also, I put my hand up and said, are we just putting knives in the hands of dangerous children? Is this technology we necessarily want to be just giving away this way? But it's complex because then there's real human suffering and there's potential for great good.
Yes.
So there's that. And there's also a risk that spirituality becomes exclusive. So there's the risk that it just makes, arseholes be more better at being arseholes. And just fine-tunes the system that's screwing us all every day.
Well, it's interesting, one of the things that for me has been a big motivation with Conscious 2 is that I recognise I've been very fortunate in the last, 10 how many years of my life that I've done relatively well in business. So I've been able to afford to go on retreat 4 weeks a year, to have weekly therapy, to be able to have the time to go to meditation. I've worked hard, but I've also been able to have been privileged enough to be able to do those things. And then I think about somebody who is, I don't know, a nurse or a teacher that's just limited holiday, is
time,
working
energy,
all the time.
Money, all...
Right, and it's like the spiritual path that I've been able to pursue is basically a privileged person's path. And how do we take the essence of that and put it in the hands of everyone?
How do we open it up? It's a real question, isn't it? I mean, I agree with you, massive privilege. I'm on another course and I'm going, oh, look, they've got middle-aged, middle-class white women. Awesome. Right. That's what I see on every course, And it's like, really? The same people? Like, where are the young people? Where, as I look around, like, where are the men sometimes?
Right, sure.
Who is this spirituality really aimed at? It seems to be, posh, wealthy, middle-aged, middle-class women, white women. That's who I see on courses, is the majority, on the majority of courses. And it's expensive.
Sure.
You get, Eslan in the States is, thousands of dollars for a course, even one that's, well-meaning for someone like Gaia House in the UK. They do their best, and they certainly don't make a lot of money, but those guys are, it's an expensive thing to have the time to do that.
Exactly. Even if it's not expensive in money, it's expensive in time, which anyone that's got, young children, a kind of not particularly well-paid job, just doesn't have time.
So, I made as much as I can freely available on YouTube, and that pissed a lot of people off in my industry because they're like, we want to keep this. And I'm like, if there's some kids in Kenya doing my stuff and they like it and they're learning embodiment, because you can learn a lot from the video,
Sure.
Great. But then also just practically as a business person, like we do a course every year. Nice advert. Okay. So you see, everyone's fucking selling. And we do a course every year and we have £50,000 worth of expenses. So if I'm not realistic about kind of bringing stuff in, because it's a great course, how do I do that? And we give away a couple of charity places every year, to kind of people that want to come and use it to help with their peace work or whatever. We support people to do that. But it's like, how do I make that course accessible?
Sure.
It's $3,500 a head. It's, a lot of people just look at that. And also culturally, like why are there not more men? Why are there not... so much of this field is dominated by a cultural perspective, that kind of West Coast, like I'm a kind of, more blue collar kind of bloke from England. I don't speak like this. And it's also like, my personality is often made bad. I go to a course in, Buddhism, and I'm a little fiery, a little provocative, and there's a way in which that's not spiritual. And I'm like, oh my God, and the men that are there, it's like, where are your balls, It's like, seriously. It's like, where are the like normal blokes? I think one of the nice things I see, in the kind of spiritual community, as well as this commodification, which is problematic, is, in business terms, brand differentiation. So now you've got like the Dharma punks, and they're like Buddhism with tattoos and swearing, which is great. And you've got the Buddhist geeks, and they're kind of geeky, they're way more blokes, and kind of so there's two examples of sort
great
of
examples,
Buddhist brands that I really like, and they're doing something unique and innovative. So as well as the disadvantages, I think, of some of these things we talked about, there's also this fantastic opportunities of doing things slightly differently and being creative.
Yeah. Well, it seems that there's an emergence that's happening. There is something new that's coming in response. We've got a couple of minutes. I'm curious as to what you would like to see happen. So
great.
If I gave you the keys to the kingdom, and
I've got it already. I'm cheeky. I stole it when you weren't looking. So what I'd like, I mean, personally, I see this on the one hand happening anyway.
Right.
What I see happening in the future and would like to see happen is an integration of people doing social change with internal change. And I see that will naturally emerge. So there'll be some radical social action groups emerging that will be both internally doing the work and using that to support very radical external work. And this is where I have to be very careful of incitement laws. So the world is being destroyed. 150 million people, UN estimate, dead by climate change in the next 15 years. If a foreign power was doing this to us, we wouldn't tolerate it.
Totally.
As it's a global kind of financial elite doing it, somehow we were okay with that. But I think increasingly people will not be okay with that, and there'll be some very severe, let's call it direct action, that will take place. And I'd like to see that both supported and driven by awareness and compassionate practice. And when that happens, we will see something that's really unique and will be very powerful. So that's really what I'm both think will happen. I'm also calling for. I'm also calling for that.
Well, it's interesting that the previous interview we filmed towards the end, you're talking about technology, and of course the capacity to organise mass action is there now in a way that it's never been before in history. That people can communicate via social media or whatever, and actually they can find other people that have a similar worldview. And of course we see that used in negative ways, but of course there's also the potential for that to be used in very positive ways. Yeah,
I think so much. It's such a rich topic, and I feel really passionate about this. And I just would like to see the kind of spiritual community back the kind of demonstrator protest community and actually take that to the next step. If you look at something like deep green resistance movements that are out there already, you see this starting to develop, and it's going to be very interesting in the future. And the spiritual wanker stuff will happen, and the consumerization of yoga will happen. That will happen. That will continue. It will deepen. It will become even more ridiculous. But I see, and I have a real hope. Actually, there's a core of something very beautiful in spirituality, which for a time has kind of gone in, and now I can see it kind of going out.
Yeah, that's a good endpoint. Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Very welcome.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for watching. We look forward to talking to you again here on Conscious Tea, hopefully very soon. Bye-bye.